皆さん、こんにちは。世界核被害者フォーラム2021へようこそ。開催ができること、皆様にご参加いただけること、大変光栄に思います。今回のフォーラムは、世界中の核の被害者や被害地域の方々がオンラインという形で出会い、それぞれの状況について学び合い、権利、尊厳、そして核のない世界、核のない未来のためのさまざまな取り組みや行動について共有をするイベントでございます。今回のフォーラムは ICAN 核兵器廃絶国際キャンペーンの協力の下でピースボートが主催をしております。私はピースボートの渡辺里香です。広島と長崎の被爆者とともに船旅を通じて世界各地で原爆被害の証言を実施し、核廃絶のメッセージを世界に届けるピースボート折り鶴プロジェクトの担当者の一人です。これまでこちらのプロジェクトで170名以上の被爆者の方々が60カ国100カ所の町で証言をこれまでされてきました。現在は新型コロナウイルスで直接人が集まれない状況でも2020年、昨年ですね、昨年よりオンラインでこちらの折り鶴プロジェクトも展開をしております。世界中の人たちに証言や経験を共有しています。まだ直接旅をすることはできないんですけれども、こういったような形で活動を続けております。この機会に、この大変な状況の中で、さまざまな形でご協力、そしてご支援をいただいている皆様にお礼を申し上げたいと思います。さて、私は今日どこからお話をしているのでしょうか。私の後ろにいるこの大きな船は第五福竜丸でございます。この船は1954年3月1日にマーシャル諸島のビキニ環礁でアメリカが行った水爆実験により被爆をした静岡県の焼津にある港を拠点にしたマグロ漁船でございます。死の灰、放射性硬化物が船に降り注ぎ、乗組員23名は全員被爆をされました。1967年にこちらの船が廃船処分となりまして、ゴミの処分場に放置をされましたが、この状況を知った市民が船の保存運動を起こし、現在は修復された形でこちらの展示館で設置をされています。本日はこの場所にスタッフの方が3名ご参加いただいております。安田和也さん、市田真理さん、そして蓮沼祐介さんは、ここを訪問した方々に核兵器の恐ろしさを伝える活動をされています。一言お願いします。
ようこそ。ここは東京都が作った社会教育施設です。平和を願うたくさんの市民の声を受け止めて、東京都がこの船を展示する施設を作ったんです。年間10万人を超える人々がここを訪れ、核の問題を考えたり学んだりしています。
この船の乗組員だった大石又さんは20歳で被爆しました。ご自身の被爆体験を核のない世界を願って今年3月亡くなるまで語り続けました。
第五福竜丸展示館では世界の核被害者についても展示をしています。ですけれども、こうした世界の核被害者に関することというのはですね、十分認知されているとは言えません。今回のフォーラムがそうした世界の核被害者の方々の声を聞き、そして問題を共有する場になればと思います。皆さんの世界中の皆さんの核被害についてのお話を聞けることを楽しみにしています。
皆さんありがとうございます。そして今回もこちらの方からお届けできることを大変嬉しく思います。展示会に関しての詳しい情報はぜひホームページの方をご覧ください。では次はオープニングメッセージを2つほど紹介いたします。まずは広島の被爆者、そして ICAN のキャンペーナーであるサーロー節子さんからです。続きまして赤十字国際委員会の副総裁のジル・カルポニエさん、どうぞ。
Greetings to all who have joined the Nuclear Survivors Forum. My name is Setsuko Thurlow. I am from Hiroshima, though now a resident of Canada. As a young girl, I witnessed my beloved city destroyed in an instant, incinerated by the heat of 4,000 degrees Celsius and contaminated by the radiation of one atomic bomb. I remember with children, men and women dying in agony without receiving any medical care or even a drop of water in this indiscriminate mass. Thus, my beloved Hiroshima was the erased face of the earth. Even after 76 years, survivors are still dying today from the effects of radiation. Many of you participating in this forum must have similar stories to share of the unspeakable horrors and inhumanity caused by the production, testing, and actual use of nuclear weapons around the world. We are grateful that this forum gives us all an opportunity to deepen our understanding of our shared experiences, to ponder their meaning, and to embrace each other with the greatest sympathy and support, to build a strong collective voice for nuclear justice. Our voices are essential to the implementation process of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. At long last, we have a treaty that finally recognizes the disproportionate harm caused by the nuclear weapon production, testing, and use to the indigenous peoples, communities of color, and children. This boldly identifies the racism and colonialism embodied in the history and doctrine of nuclear weapons. The treaty furthermore makes a bridge from harm reparations in the positive obligations that require assistance for victims of nuclear weapons, nuclear weapon use and testing, and remediation of contaminated environments. I have profound solidarity with all of you. My deepest thanks for commitment to work for a world free of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today we pay tribute to the victims and survivors of nuclear weapons use around the world. Let me first thank Peace Boat for this opportunity to share a few words with you at this important and timely event. The courage and determination of the Hibakusha and of all those affected by nuclear tests greatly contributed to make the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons a reality. The testimonies of those who survived and the memory of those who tragically passed away must continue to guide our efforts to rid the world of these inhuman weapons. Since the horrific bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, we, the International Committee of the Red Cross, together with the entire Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, have consistently called for the prohibition and the elimination of nuclear weapons, putting human security at the center. The treaty is a historic achievement. It is a victory for humanity and multilateralism. Nuclear weapons are immoral and now also illegal under international law. Indeed, considering their catastrophic humanitarian consequences on humans and on the environment, it is extremely doubtful for the ICRC that nuclear weapons could ever be used in accordance with international humanitarian law. While the harm caused by nuclear weapons cannot be reversed, the treaty contains important obligations to assist victims and decontaminate the environment. At the first meeting of states parties that will take place next March, states have a unique opportunity to agree on concrete actions to implement these obligations. To this end, the involvement of survivors will be crucial. We must better understand the needs of those harmed by nuclear weapons, in particular the impact of nuclear tests on affected communities. And we must ensure that these communities are fully informed not only of the risks and effects of nuclear radiation, but also of their rights under the treaty and other legal frameworks. Awareness raising and transparency should be at the forefront of states' efforts. Nuclear survivors can and should have a strong voice in shaping the treaty's implementation and the future of nuclear disarmament. This forum plays an important role in this respect, and I wish you every success in this important endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the powerful
力強いメッセージありがとうございます。続きまして、ピースボート ICAN の川崎明より、このフォーラムの意義とプログラムについて紹介をしていただきたいと思います。ありがとうございます。今回のフォーラムでは、核被害者の声を共有し、それを共に聞き、学ぶためのイベントでございます。世界で最初の核実験は、秘密の開発の後、1945年7月にアメリカのニューメキシコ州で行われました。そして同じ年の8月には広島と長崎に対する核兵器の攻撃が数十万人の命を奪いました。その後、核軍拡競争が続きました。1954年3月にアメリカが水爆実験を行った時にもこのような船が数千船も太平洋を航海をしておりました。そして放射性硬化物の影響を受けました。想像してみてください。9カ国の核保有国が2000回を超える核実験を行い、我々の海そして土地を汚染しました。そして現在、彼らは1万3000発の核兵器を保有し、現代化をしています。これは国家の安全保障の名の下で行われていますが、一体誰のための安全保障でしょうか。核の連鎖の各段階で健康を害され、そして権利を侵害される人々が必ずいます。これからの時間で30名以上の方々の証言や視点を共有していただきます。私自身もとても楽しみにしております。 と同時に、限られた時間の中で登壇していただくことはできませんが、準備の段階でご意見をいただいた多くの方々にも感謝をしたいと思います。本当にありがとうございます。今回、チェルノビリや福島で起きたような原発事故の影響に焦点を当てるための時間を持つことが残念ながらできません。ここ日本では福島第一原発で起きた事故から10年が経った今、大量の処理はされたけれどもまだ汚染されている水を海に放出するという安全性と説明責任について深刻な問題のある計画がされています。放射線そのものを完全に消すということはできないという事実がありますが、私たちにできることは、それ以上、これ以上の核の事故、被害を防ぐことです。だからこそ、核被害者や市民団体は、自分たちの生存のために、そして次の世代に引き継ぐべき環境のために、世界に向けて訴えてきました。その重要な節目になったのが、2017年の核兵器禁止条約の採択でした。この条約は、今年の2021年1月に発効し、それによって核兵器はついに国際法で明確に違法化されました。この条約は、被爆者や核実験の被害者を認め、中で第6条では核兵器の被害者に対する援助と環境の回復についても定めています。来年2020年3月にオーストリアのウィーンで核兵器禁止条約の第1回の締約国会議が開かれます。そこで核被害者の権利と尊厳のための明確な原則と具体的な行動を成立しなければなりません。このフォーラムは2つのパートに分かれています。第1部では、ウランの採掘、開発、生産、核兵器の実験や使用、そして廃棄物などによる幅広い影響に焦点を当てます。そして、医学的な影響だけではなく、先住民を含む多くの女性や男性が受けてきた社会的、経済的、そして心理的な影響についても学んでいきます。そして第2部では、禁止条約や行動を一緒に起こす機会について考えていきたいと思います。また、若い世代の役割もハイライトされます。それぞれのパートでは、事前に収録された数多くの証言のビデオと、そしてライブのパネルディスカッションが含まれます。ぜひ、コメントやご質問などは YouTube の方でお寄せください。MC が確認いたしますし、また、後日作成される予定のサマリーにも反映されます。また、関連の証言や資料などがございましたら、ぜひ送っていただければと思います。フォーラムのウェブサイトに後日掲載いたします。クロージングでは、共通の課題やメッセージを核兵器禁止条約の締約国会議に向けて確認していけることを願っております。最後になりますが、ピースボートと ICAN を代表いたしまして、今回のフォーラムの開催にご協力いただいた講演団体の皆様、そしてウェブサイトの方に記載されている賛同団体の皆様にも心より感謝を申し上げます。ありがとうございます。川崎さん、ありがとうございます。この後のセッションでは、世界各地の核の影響を受けたコミュニティからの生の声をお届けいたします。ぜひ、核被害者の声に耳を傾け、核のない世界のために私たちが一緒にできることを考えていきましょう。どうぞ。
Hello, my name is Dimity Hawkins. I work for nuclear justice with the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons in Australia and also through a new initiative called the Nuclear Truth Project. I am speaking today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations in Naarm or Melbourne, Australia. I want to start by thanking our friends at Peaceboat for this initiative of the World Nuclear Survivors Forum. Peaceboat has a long history of bringing people together in conversation around loss and impacts of nuclear harms. The forum builds this global conversation as the world increasingly works towards nuclear abolition through the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I grew up in Australia and in the South Pacific, which saw considerable nuclear testing in last century. Here we know well the impacts of nuclear weapons testing and use do not begin or end in a day or a year, but extend over lifetimes, stretching beyond lines drawn on maps and through generations. But these weapons also have their origins in other nuclear activities, including uranium mining, nuclear power and processing, as well as weapons development. They all have their inherent risks, and all nuclear activities end with the inevitable complication of nuclear waste. In today's stories, we hear testimonies provided by community members and organizations living and working on the front lines of the nuclear age. We will hear from people impacted by uranium mining, nuclear test downwinders, survivors of the first use of nuclear weapons, and communities living with intergenerational harms. We will also hear about the struggle of survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This includes those who, even today, decades later, are still working to be recognized as victims and to expand the definition of those impacted. You can't help but recognize in these stories both the incredible resilience and the strength of resistance of the people who truly lead our work, the survivors of nuclear harm. They help us shape an understanding of the breadth and the depth of what it means when we speak of victims and survivors of the nuclear age. Within these stories, you will hear of ongoing fights for human health and environmental justice. You will also hear of the generosity, the care, and the solidarity within and between these communities, as well as calls for support. We hope that you will listen deeply to the stories so generously shared by these people, all experts in their lived experience. They offer intimate and compelling testimonies, stretching across different cultures, backgrounds, and locations around our world. We thank every one of the people who have offered their stories and voices to this Nuclear Survivors Forum. And we thank you all for joining us, to listen with care, to consider deeply, and to work towards nuclear justice, bringing an end to all nuclear threats. Let's listen to the first story.
Okay, my name's Sue Coleman Hazeldine. I'm a Gulgurra woman from Sojourner on the far west coast of South Australia. I was very young when the bombs testing started happening in Australia. The winds brought the radiation fallouts to us. There was 12 tests held on Australian soil, including the Montebello Island. Now we have got proof of 9 of them, which way the winds blew at the time. And we superimposed them, and it was amazing to see Australia's legacy from the English and Australian governments as being totally black from the radiation fallout. The first image is of the bombs that were tested on Montebello Islands, Emu Fields and Maralinga. This image shows the wind changes, and then we superimpose the wind changes. The next image is of the whole radiation fallout across Australia. This is the legacy to Australia from the Australian and United Kingdom governments. Now, we've been living with grief and loss for a long time. There's been so many different cancers, and so many birth defects. Now, people talk about grief and loss. Well, we live with it every day. It does not go away. Even 60 years later, babies are dying of really complicated defects that there's no explanation for. And we bury our babies. So the grief and loss does not go away. You know, we have suffered at the hands of the Australian and English governments. They have not cared that we are still suffering to this day, nearly 70 years later. And our children are suffering. Children all over the world are suffering because of radiation poisoning. You know, you just got to look at Chernobyl, Fukushima. People everywhere have been touched with this poisonous substance. We really need the Australian government to join the rest of the world that is coming on board and outlaw nuclear weapons, nuclear submarines, because if you've got no need for the radiation, there'll be no need for the mines. And if the mines are shutting down, there'll be no need for waste dumps, which can be just as dangerous as any bomb. They start leaking, we won't know that that poison is seeping around through us again, just like the radiation fallout of all those years ago. Nobody knew what was falling amongst them, but everybody started to feel it, and as the years go on, we are still feeling it. We are still suffering. And we really do need the Australian government to stand up and say, enough. You know, we've damaged Australia, we've hurt the people. Aboriginal people have been dislocated just to please various mining companies, the uranium companies, you know, just everybody that wants something from Australia, the Aboriginal people get pushed aside. It's just not fair. We're the First Nations people and we're the ones left behind in everything. So if we can stop mining on our country, protect our culture, stop the waste dump, tell the governments to think just to stop building nuclear submarines, the rest of the world can win too, because there are animals out there that are dying and it seems like nobody cares, but we care. And, you know, I'm starting to get old and tired, but that's not the end of my fight, because I've got children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that are all ready and willing to stand up and fight and say no more. Give us a clean, nuclear-free future.
My name is Jeremiah, and I live in Cedrina. I'm Jeremiah, and I live in Cedrina, and I don't want a nuclear, and I live in Australia.
Even though tiredness and age is starting to catch up on me and I'm slowing down, my fight will continue, because I've got my children, grandchildren, coming along and standing up now and saying,
we don't want nuclear, we want a greener future.
Got a sickness through our family, and you know, I believe wholly and solely in what my wife believed in. Well, that's about all I can say.
And all you people out there, stay safe and stay strong.
Bonjour. My name is Joan Morningstar. That's my government name. And my spirit name is Aghirin'man Anquitque, a South Cloud woman. And I live at Misogwi First Nation. It's about 5 miles west of Blind River, Ontario. We're pretty well located between Sault Ste. Marie and Sudbury, in between, about the middle. In the early 80s, Chemical, back then their name El Dorado, moved here, and they put up a plant. While they're building it, they brought in a bunch of men, steel workers and everything to build the plant. So there was trailers used as buck houses. I was hired to work there. So I worked there, and it was good to work there. Then I got laid off, and there was no reason why they laid me off, because nothing changed. So I was laid off for 2 weeks, and I wasn't given no reason. So when they called me back, I noticed some people were different. They were not really making eye contact with me and not really talking to me. And I had a friend there, and I asked her, I said, what happened? I said, it seems different here. She goes, oh, nothing, and she walked away quick. So I went back to work that day. I sat down. I was cleaning the last room, and I heard music. So I thought I left a radio on in one of the rooms. There was 10 rooms per trailer. So I checked the rooms, there was no radio on. So I went back to the room, I sat down on the chair and I listened. And I could hear the music. It was faint at first, but after a while it got louder. I could hear the drums. Then I heard men, women, and children wailing, crying, and a lot of sorrow. And at that moment, that's when I got choked up. I pretty near started crying because it was so sorrowful. So after that was over, that evening after work, I went to talk with my mother-in-law. And I told her what happened, my experience. And she said, it sounds like they disturbed something there. She said, maybe a burial ground. She said, go back, she said, and talk to your friend and see if you can get some information. I said, okay. So I went back and I sat down with my friend. I said, tell me what happened here, because there was a lot of things happening at work. And so she looked at me and looked around. She looked back at me. She said, they told us if we told you that we would get fired. She said, but she said they excavated. She said there was a burial ground. She said they had helicopters here and lights hooked up 24/7. She said they took everything out. She said archaeologists and everything was there. So with that, she got up and left, and I went back that evening and I told my mother-in-law, yeah, they did dig up a burial ground. So she told me to make an offering and go there and make that offering with food and tobacco and that. I said, okay. So that weekend, me and my husband, then we went by a canoe. We parked along the bank. We had to climb up on the bank because we snuck on the land chemical. And so we got to the tree line and we walked in. And that's when we could see all the indentations where they did the rectangle squares and everything on the ground. So I went there to a few of them. I talked with them. I thank them for reaching out to me. And once I could hear the drums and the singing and everything again, I sat down, I started crying. And then we put our offerings all down, we left. I went back and talked to my mother-in-law, and she told me they reached out to you. She said, try to bring our people back home. So that's been, since about 1982 that I started this. And now it's 2021. And I feel motivated again that maybe this time I'll get them home with the sacred items, because I know when our people get buried, they get buried with their sacred items. I don't want them hanging up no more in the museum or nothing. They have to be buried again, and I just want to bring the people home.
Joan, how far away is the refinery and the incinerator from your reserve here?
Well, if you go, there's 1.6
kilometers,
but there's people on the other side of the highway that live closer, but you don't see none of that information in chemicals reports, because they always say refer to Blind River being the furthest community. It's like Misogwi First Nation is invisible to them. They got emergency evacuation plan for the golf course. They got emergency evacuation plan. There's a hydro yard over here. They got emergency evacuation for that. But no mention of Misogwi, who lives right on their doorstep, basically. We have no emergency evacuation. If their bells went off today, do you think I could hear them? And because I got disabilities right now, I had cancer from, I believe, caused by that refinery. I got lung cancer, and from the lung cancer, the doctor said it was the first time they seen cancer attack the motor skills, fine and growth, the talking skills and the walking. So I'm doing better than I was last year.
Do you think that's because you're so close to the refinery, or do you think it might have something to do with the incinerator that they put in as well?
Well, when they had the fallout way back in 1991, I think, or 1990, there was over 100 and some yellow cake, I guess, that was released. And I remember waking up that morning, our car, which was white, it was all covered with this yellowish stuff. Yellowish green stuff was all covered. So I went out there and I took some off the car with my hand. My husband, then he came out too, and look, we didn't know what it is. But right now, I got cancer. He has cancer. He's my ex now, but he got cancer. The woman, my friend that lived next door to me, she got cancer and died. The young girl that lived across the street from me, her kids has multi health issues. And then this other friend down at the street, her daughter got breast cancer. The guy that worked at Chemical, not far from there, from where I live, he died of cancer.
It's all over the community, eh?
It's people been dying about every 3 months with cancer from here and from Blind River. I just heard another guy from Blind River.
Wow, Joan, thank you very much.
Bonjour mes chers compatriotes, donc je me nomme Al-Mustafa Alassane, coordinateur de la société civile d'Arlit, le père fondateur de l'ONG Aghirin'man, une association des droits nigériens. Cette association donc qui se veut de protection de l'environnement et le mieux-être, c'est-à-dire les droits de l'homme. Alors nous sommes en train de poser un certain nombre de questions à Orano donc ex-Arriva, avec ses filiales au Niger, c'est-à-dire ses filiales, il y a Soumaïr et Cominac. Donc Cominac d'ailleurs vient de fermer en 2021 là. Et là ils sont donc en train d'essayer ce qu'ils appellent le réaménagement du site. Donc c'est une situation extrêmement préoccupante pour nous parce que bon, c'est inédit dans d'autres, c'est quelque chose qu'ils ont déjà fait au Gabon, à Mounana. Et que 50 ans après, ils font exactement la même chose donc au Niger, c'est-à-dire d'abandonner la population avec de la radiation. Donc nous, ce que nous faisons, c'est de les rappeler et puis interpeller aussi l'État pour qu'en tout cas les normes soient respectées en matière de protection de l'environnement. Et que de l'autre côté, ce qu'on appelle le réaménagement du site soit fait en tout cas dans les normes. Voilà, donc le Niger, c'est un pays où on produit de l'uranium il y a 50 ans, mais c'est le pays le plus pauvre du monde. Et de l'autre côté, et puis bon, on nous laisse avec la pollution durable et toutes les maladies imaginables. Malheureusement, donc c'est ça notre situation. Et c'est contre cela que s'élève un peu donc l'ONG Aghirin'man pour dire un peu non à ce genre de pratiques et ce genre de situations. Voilà ce qu'on peut vous dire, mes chers amis. Nous sommes avec vous et nous souhaitons quand même faire que notre voix soit la voix la plus forte contre ces dangers de l'uranium. La meilleure solution de gérer l'uranium, c'est de les laisser sous sol. Je suis convaincu que l'humanité a besoin d'électricité, mais on n'arrive pas à maîtriser les dangers de la radioactivité, donc liés à l'uranium. Voilà ce que nous pouvons dire. Nous vous souhaitons un bon forum. Et nous vous prions de penser à nous pendant le forum. À bientôt.
सबों को मेरी ओर से जोहार। मेरा नाम घनश्याम बिरुली है और झारखंड के जादूगढ़ा में रहते हैं, जहां यूरेनियम माइनिंग होता है। और यहाँ 7 यूरेनियम माइनिंग है। ये काफ़ी मात्रा में यहाँ यूरेनियम का खुदाई चलता है और यहाँ मिलिंग भी है, जिसके जहाँ पर यूरेनियम को पत्थर से अलग करने का जो प्रक्रिया है, ये उसके कारण काफ़ी मात्रा में यूरेनियम कचरा निकलता है और उसको इकट्ठा करने के लिए, डंप करने के लिए टैलिंग पॉन्ड कंपनी बनाती है, जो गांव के बीच में होता है। और इसके कारण काफ़ी रेडिएशन का निकलता है और रेडिएशन के कारण यहाँ बहुत बड़ी समस्या उत्पन्न हुई है। यहाँ महिलाओं का जो रेडिएशन के कारण देखने को मिलता है, यहाँ बच्चे विकलांग पैदा हो रहे हैं और काफ़ी मरे हुए बच्चे पैदा हो रहे हैं, गर्भपात हो रहा है और मजदूरों में और यहाँ बसने वाले लोगों का टीबी और कैंसर जैसे खतरनाक बीमारियों से पीड़ित हो रहे हैं और अभी काफ़ी लोगों का किडनी खराब हो रहा है। ये समस्या बनी है और इसके खिलाफ हम लोगों का संगठन है झारखंडी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन अगेंस्ट रेडिएशन, जो काफ़ी समय से 20 वर्षों से हम लोग इसके खिलाफ आंदोलन कर रहे हैं और अभी भी आंदोलन में लगे हुए हैं। ये एक हमारे जीवन के लिए, ये पूरा पर्यावरण के लिए ये बहुत ही खतरनाक है। यूरेनियम माइनिंग के कारण लोग तो बीमार हो रहे हैं और कितने सालों तक इस पर्यावरण को प्रदूषित करते रहेगा इसका कोई ठिकाना नहीं है। यहाँ का हवा खराब हो चुका है, यहाँ का पानी प्रदूषित हो चुका है, यहाँ का मिट्टी खराब हो चुका है। ये पूरा जीने लायक ही नहीं है, लेकिन लोग रहते हैं अनजान बन के या उस समस्या को समझ नहीं पाते हैं, क्योंकि ये समस्या जो है विज्ञान के साथ जुड़ा हुआ है। अगर हम किसी डैम से डूबते हैं, डैम से या आग से जलते हैं, तो उसका असर तुरंत हमको दिखता है, लेकिन ये हमेशा लंबा समय तक प्रभावित करने वाला जो समस्या है, जो रेडिएशन का मामला है, इसके बारे में हिरोशिमा और नागासाकी के लोगों को तो उसका दर्द झेले हैं, रेडिएशन का से होने वाली बीमारियों का दर्द झेले हैं और उस बारे में, उस समस्या के बारे में बहुत बढ़िया से जानते हैं। हम ये कहना चाहेंगे हमारे देश की जो सरकार है और हमारे यूरेनियम माइनिंग का खुदाई करता है, ये कंपनी जानबूझ करके ये समस्या को बताना नहीं चाहते हैं और इस समस्या को दबाना चाहते हैं। हम लोग कम पढ़े लिखे लोग जो गांव में रहते हैं इस समस्या को जाने कि आज हमारा जो स्वास्थ्य का जो इतिहास रहा है, यूरेनियम माइनिंग होने के पहले इस तरह का कोई बीमारी नहीं होता था। हमारे लोग बहुत कम लोग मरते थे और काफी लंबा समय तक जीते थे, लेकिन आज बहुत कम समय में लोग मर रहे हैं, बच्चे विकलांग पैदा हो रहे हैं, मरे हुए बच्चे पैदा हो रहे हैं। ये बहुत बड़ी समस्या हमारे समाज के अंदर में हुआ है। तो हम अभी ये कहना चाहते हैं कि जो भी हमारा ये वीडियो देख रहे हैं, हम सबसे गुजारिश करते हैं कि पूरे दुनिया में जहाँ भी यूरेनियम माइनिंग हो रहा है या यूरेनियम कचरा डाला जाता है और वहाँ के लोग यदि प्रभावित हो रहे हैं तो उनको सपोर्ट करना चाहिए और यदि आंदोलित हैं तो उस आंदोलन को मजबूत करने के लिए प्रयास करना चाहिए, तभी हम लोग बचेंगे, अन्यथा हम लोग नहीं बच पाएंगे। हमारा संगठन की ओर से मांग है कि टेलिंग पॉन्ड जहाँ पर यूरेनियम कचरा डाला जाता है उसके इर्द गिर्द बसने वाले लोगों का पुनर्वास सुरक्षित स्थान पर होना चाहिए और जो भी लोग रेडिएशन से प्रभावित है, इस क्षेत्र के लोग या यूरेनियम माइनिंग में काम करने वाले मजदूर हों, सबको कॉम्पनसेशन मिलना चाहिए। और ये भी हमारा मांग है कि हमारे इस क्षेत्र में और यूरेनियम माइनिंग नहीं होना चाहिए। इस क्षेत्र के हवा, पानी, मिट्टी में कितना रेडिएशन का स्तर है उसका भी जांच होना चाहिए।
मेरा नाम डुमका मुर्मू है और मैं जोर का सचिव हूँ। सरकार और यूसेल वाले यहाँ के आदिवासियों को गुमराह कर रहे हैं और यहाँ जमीन लेने के लिए फिर जो आदिवासियों को बीच में लड़ाई का एक्स्ट्रा यंत्र रच रहे हैं, लेकिन हमारे संगठन उनको कामयाब नहीं होने देगा और उस पर जो भी जैसा रणनीति अपना रही है यूसेल, हम उनको जन आंदोलन के थ्रू में उसको बंद कर देंगे। हम लोग यही चाहता है कि हमारे भारत सरकार को इसके बारे में दबाव दीजिए कि यहाँ के आदिवासी लोग को आप बेघर मत कीजिए। यहाँ जो उसका अस्तित्व है, हक है, ज़मीन है, उनको ज़मीन से हक नहीं किया जाए ताकि वो बात उन तक पहुँचे।
Johar, greetings from Jharkhand, India. As you know, we are Jharkhandi Organization Against Radiation, situated in Jadugoda, Jharkhand in India, and struggling for many decades against the uranium mining, its impact on health and environment, and raising voice to get justice for the radiation victim in this area. As you know, India is situated in very critical geographical location where its northern border, Chinese and Indian armies are at war-like situation. Last year itself, many casualties happened in both sides. Even in this coldest winter and in that inhospitable situation, number of troops in the both side of border are increasing. And media reporting that Chinese are rapidly expanding their nuclear arsenal and also developing and making nuclear silo in that area. And in the Western Front, the volatile situation of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran, and in the southern side, Chinese are again building ports in Indian Ocean in Sri Lanka. For last 7 years, we have a right-wing Hindu nationalist party in power. For them, it is very favorable situation for their aggressive policies and propaganda. There is no political party who can raise voice against the injustice done by the uranium company in this area. Also, there is no match between the mighty uranium company and its powerful lobby and us. Their human and economical resources are limitless. On the other hand, we have just our culture, traditions to fight with. We tried all possible ways to resist and get justice for many decades. We tried all possible ways. Protest on the street, going to higher judicial courts, going to international conferences, ask reputed international institutions to do studies here, but all fail. Yes, we are able to save our land, traditional land, but not able to get justice for the suffering of the people in this area. On the one side, company replace their aging employee with the new recruits, and they continue with their dirty politics and propaganda. On the other side, our people, our community and our youth are not equipped or not updated with the new information which is required to fight them. So there is a need to have a group or a platform where mining affected communities who are mostly indigenous people all around the world, they can come together, they discuss their strategies, their suffering, their experiences, and make strategies for strengthening the grassroots movement.
My name is Mary Dixon. I am a downwinder, a survivor of nuclear weapons. Like tens of thousands of Americans, I grew up under the clouds of radioactive fallout during the years of nuclear testing. We drank milk from a nearby dairy, ate fresh vegetables from the garden, mixed sugar with snow to pretend it was ice cream, and played in puddles of rainwater in our tranquil Salt Lake City, Utah neighborhood. We were only children. How were any of us to know that a silent poison was threading its way through our bodies when a government we trusted repeatedly assured us that there is no danger, and distributed pamphlets telling us not to let reports of Geiger counters going crazy bother us? We watched films warning against communist invasions, did duck and cover drills in school that were more like games, and didn't think about the Cold War that was raging or nuclear bombs that were regularly detonated in nearby Nevada. Between 1951 and 1992, the U.S. government detonated 100 nuclear bombs in the atmosphere and 828 underground. Winds carried radioactive fallout from those detonations, all far more powerful than the bombs that leveled Hiroshima and Nagasaki, hundreds, even thousands of miles away from the Nevada test site, exposing countless people downwind to deadly levels of radiation. The detonation that most haunts me is the one named Sedan. I had just turned 7 when it was detonated on July 6, 1962. Though exploded underground, that one test released a plume of fallout 16,000 feet high that left a crater displacing 12 million tons of radiated earth, which went into that plume and fell out on my Salt Lake City neighborhood and far beyond. In my 20s, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. I underwent a thyroidectomy and subsequent radiation treatments. Every morning, a doctor came to my hospital door to point a Geiger counter at me to measure how hot I was. On my door and hospital bracelet were the radiation symbols. I was the radioactive material. When I left the hospital, they burned my clothes and told me not to be around pregnant women or try to get pregnant for a year. Another surgery meant I never could have children. As adults, my older sister and I began compiling a list of childhood friends and neighbors who had cancer, tumors, autoimmune diseases. That list numbered 54 people in a 5-block area of our childhood neighborhood. Too many of my classmates died, one of a brain tumor when we were 8. I remember wondering why she came to school with her head shaved. 4 weeks later, her 4-year-old brother died of testicular cancer. Another friend died of bone cancer at 16, others of brain tumors. No wonder one of my neighborhood friends said he felt lucky to make it to 40. In 2001, I added my sister's name to the list. She was only 46 when she died, leaving 3 young children behind. Now my younger sister is battling cancer and my youngest sister is being treated for autoimmune disorders. Of the Utah downwinders I worked with most closely, I am the only one still living. I listened with despair as one called me at the end of her life, tearfully begging me to help her die, a heartbreaking and impossible request. Another one told me before she died, "You have to keep fighting for this because the rest of us are too sick." I feel an enormous responsibility to all of them to do this work. That's why I've spent decades researching, writing, and speaking about the human toll of nuclear weapons testing. Over the years, countless people have reached out to tell me their own devastating stories. The woman who lost 3 children to leukemia during above-ground testing and is now seeing her 3 adult children battle cancer. The woman who lost her husband to cancer then felt her heart shatter when her 5-year-old son, who had been diagnosed with bone cancer, woke up from surgery asking, "Mama, where's my leg?" I could go on for hours with heartbreaking stories of the harm wreaked on unsuspecting Americans by radioactive fallout. Barbara Rose Johnston, author of Half-Lives and Half-Truths, wrote, "The arms race did not prevent nuclear war. It was a nuclear war." My late friend put it perfectly. We're victims of the Cold War, only we never enlisted, and no one will ever fold a flag over our coffins. The Cold War had casualties, and we and too many others like us around this planet are those casualties. We have suffered and continue to suffer. We've comforted the sick, buried and mourned the dead, and worried with each ache, pain, and new lump that we are getting sick again. Few Americans know the extent and staggering human cost of our nuclear past. We'll never know how many people were harmed, but we do know that it was far more than have ever been acknowledged. Sadly, most victims of nuclear weapons will never know they are. While other people carry pictures of their children in their wallets, I carry this map showing where fallout from atmospheric testing went. It was created by Richard Miller, author of Under the Cloud, The Decades of Nuclear Testing, after analyzing the government's own data. People are stunned when they see it. Fallout does not respect arbitrary borders on a map. No lead shield stops it at county or state lines. The jet stream carried it across the country where it fell to the ground in rain or snow and worked its way into the food chain and our bodies. That's how it was measured in my hometown in the Midwest and more than 2,000 miles away in Albany, New York. A National Cancer Institute study estimates that virtually everyone living in the U.S. at the time received some dose of radioactive iodine, and that up to 212,000 cases of thyroid cancer alone may be linked to fallout. That's just one radioisotope and one fallout-related cancer. Radiation from 928 detonations doesn't just go away. Researchers are still finding strontium-90 that mimics calcium and is absorbed by bone and teeth in baby teeth collected in the 1960s. There is a large lag time between exposure and illness, so that it takes 20, 30, or 40 years for some cancers to show up. People are still getting sick, their cancers are returning, health complications are showing up, the genetic damage affects new generations. We were patriotic Americans who trusted a government that not only betrayed and lied to us, but worse, considered us expendable. Declassified minutes of the Atomic Energy Commission during the early years of testing in Nevada read like high drama. When one commissioner lamented that people and livestock were getting sick and dying, another blasted, "People have got to learn to live with the facts of life, and fallout is a fact of life. Nothing is going to get in the way of testing, nothing." And he called for judicious handling of public information. Lying. What is the moral responsibility of a government that knowingly harms its own people? In 1990, U.S. Congress finally passed the Extremely Limited Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, RECA for short. Given the vast extent of testing, the number of claimants represents just a fraction of those harmed by radioactive fallout on American soil. When it was passed, President George H.W. Bush admitted it could only be considered partial restitution. What price, after all, can you put on human health and a human life? Nothing can bring back my sister and all the others. Our families and communities have paid and continue to pay an enormous price. Without congressional action, RECA expires this July. Bipartisan bills introduced in the U.S. Congress would extend it another 19 years and expand it to include 7 Western states, as well as Guam. For those of us who have suffered for decades and are burdened with ongoing medical bills, time is literally running out. Too many have already died. The legislation, though still not inclusive enough, is a step toward long overdue justice and atonement. Hopefully, Congress will do the right thing, even if it's too little too late. And just as importantly, those of us from nations around this globe who know firsthand the tragedy of nuclear weapons must stand in solidarity to bear witness and demand that the mistakes of the past never be repeated. Recounting our stories is incredibly painful, but we cannot let them die with us. In the move to ban nuclear weapons, our collective voices are absolutely essential. Nothing provides a more powerful incentive than our personal tragedies. My cancer, my sister's death, and the death of so many others has given me great motivation to end the nuclear threat. There is power in our words. The stories I listen to move me, inspire me, even as they dismay and unnerve me. We must break the stranglehold of the powerful military-industrial complex. We must do all we can to ensure that no government ever again sacrifices innocent human beings to the madness of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
안녕하세요. 저는 한국인 원폭 피해자 협회 회장 이규열입니다. 먼저 피스보드에서 핵 없는 세상을 만들고 세계 평화를 위한 운동에 참여하시는 피스보드와 관계자 여러분께 감사의 말씀을 드리고, 특히 2021년도 세계 핵 피해자 포럼을 준비하고 개최한 데 대하여 축하와 함께 격려를 보냅니다. 잘 아시다시피 지난 1월 유엔에서 50개국 이상 회원국이 비준한 핵무기 금지 조약 기구가 탄생하였는데도 불구하고 정작 핵을 보유하고 있는 미국이나 중국, 소련, 프랑스나 영국 같은 강대국들은 이를 반대하고 미동도 하지 않은 채 아무런 움직임도 없이, 특히 우리 일본과 한국은 핵 피해국이면서도 이 운동에 참여하지 않고 비준조차 하지 않은 것은 매우 유감스러운 일이라 아니할 수 없습니다. 우리 한국인 원폭 피해자는 1945년 8월 6일과 9일 일본의 히로시마와 나가사키에서 일제의 강점기간 중 히로시마에 7만 명, 나가사키에 약 3만 명의 한국인이 살고 있었는데 1945년 8월 6일 히로시마에서 또 8월 9일 나가사키에서 미국의 핵 공격을 받고 10만 명 넘는 조선인 피해자가 희생자가 발생하였습니다. 이로 인해 5만 명이 현장에서 숨지고 5만 명이 핵 피해를 입은 채 조국의 강복과 함께 귀국하였으나 모두가 숨지고 지금은 2,100여 명의 불과한 생존자가 있습니다. 인류 역사를 더듬어 볼 때 핵무기는 그야말로 인류를 괴멸시키고 온갖 지구의 생태계를 흔적도 없이 만드는 정말 위험한 병기입니다. 우리 피스보드와 함께 세계 평화를 추구하는 우리 인류들은 핵무기 없는 세상을 만드는데 모두가 앞장서야 할 것이며, 특히 원폭 피해를 입은 피해자 당사자들은 더더욱 핵무기 폐기 운동에 앞장서야 할 것으로 생각을 합니다. 핵 피해자에 대해서 추가로 제가 말씀을 더 드린다면은 우리 핵 피해자 1세대는 말할 것도 없고 2세와 3세대의 그 후유증이 심각하기로 이루 말할 수 없습니다. 원인 모를 병마와 함께 시달리는 우리 2세, 3세 후손들의 실태는 그야말로 말할 수 없을 정도로 병마와 시달리고 있고, 또 원인을 모르니까 제대로 치료조차 하지 못하고 있는 그런 실정입니다. 이러한 것들을 볼 때 정말 핵 피해자의 당사자로서 너무나 안타깝고 보기 힘들 정도입니다. 아무튼 오늘 피스보트에서 주최하는 2021 세계 핵 피해자 포럼이 성공적으로 잘 이루어지고 하여 핵 무기가 지구상에서 사라지고 핵 없는 세계 평화가 이루어지기를 간절히 바라면서 말씀을 마치겠습니다. 감사합니다.
On 21st July 2021, 84 Hiroshima Black Rain survivors got a groundbreaking victory at Hiroshima High Court. The court ordered government to designate Black Rain survivors as official hibakusha and provide state health care like other hibakusha. The government ignored their suffering for 76 years and excluding them from its aid regime set up in 1957. The Liaison Council of Black Rain survivors groups petitioned local and central government for more than 30 years and finally appealed to the court in 2015. It took 6 years to win. This is too long for elderly plaintiffs. 19 passed away during the trial, but this victory will save estimated 13,000 survivors in Hiroshima, other than plaintiffs. It is certainly great local news, but I think its implications are also global. Here, I explain how Black Rain survivors have been excluded from the state aid regime and how their experience was denied for half a century. Then I discuss the meaning of this achievement and its possible global impacts. The atomic bomb medical treatment law was enacted in 1957. This was the first state legislation supporting atomic bomb survivors. Without any state help for more than a decade, many survivors were trapped in the vicious circle of deteriorating health and serious poverty. They also had to live with constant anxiety and the shadow of death. Knowing this predicament, local doctors started to petition for state support along with the Hiroshima city government. The movement to ban nuclear bombs triggered by the bikini testing also created a national tide demanding registration to save survivors. The medical law provided state medical service for survivors who had radiation-related illnesses. But importantly, it also provided free medical checkups to survivors who had not yet developed any radiation-related illness. It aimed for early detection and rapid cure. This expresses the very principle of the law to eliminate the fear of the hibakusha. The court decision this year rightly recalled this principle and demanded that the government follow this spirit. The target of the medical law was hibakusha, defined and classified into 4 categories. These were carried on into the atomic bomb survivors support law enacted in 1995. Category 1, direct hibakusha. Category 2, entering the city hibakusha. Category 3, those exposed to radiation but not in the above 2 categories. Category 4, children in the womb. The third category is intentionally ambiguous. Lawmakers primarily thought of survivors who took part in rescue activities or disposed of the dead. However, they also assumed other possible cases which they had not even thought about, with very limited scientific knowledge about radiation. The court this year judged the Black Rain survivors should be in this third category. Then why did the government forget about the spirit of the law and wrongly underutilize the third category for such a long time? Despite its good principle, the medical law disappointed many in the beginning. because of its very limited services for a small number of beneficiaries. Local governments and doctors strongly petitioned. Their efforts resulted in a new law in 1968 and revising the medical law 6 times until 1976. The state expanded designated areas and increased expenditure for the aid regime about 250 times in 20 years. This attitude, however, dramatically changed in the late 70s. In 1980, the government declared that it would never expand the designated area without scientific and rational evidence. The reason council petitioned, but all were rejected as unscientific. Then what is the government science to reject the survivors' realities? The government science officially recognized 2 sources of radiation which caused tangible health damage on hibakusha. The main one is the initial radiation emitted in the air within a minute of the explosion. The other is induced radiation, in which neutron rays interacted with such elements as the nuclei of soil. In both sources, its science only considers external exposure, and hence the amount of radiation is the key to defining its health effect. On the other hand, the government has consistently denied the health effect of the fallout, so-called ashes of death. U.S. Army official Thomas Farrell said in 1945, Hiroshima atomic bomb was burst so high up in the air that no radiation exists in Hiroshima. Surprisingly, the government expert in this Black Rain trial argued the same until today and rejected any possible health effect of the fallout because its very low dose could have done no harm through external exposure. The plaintiffs argue totally the opposite. They testify the fallout poured down on a very wide area, reaching 30 kilometers from the hypocenter, and most plaintiffs had developed radiation-related illnesses, including even acute symptoms. Lawyers and scientists supported them by explaining the mechanism of spreading black rain areas and argued the health effect of internal exposure by air and food, and even with a tiny dose. The court accepted the plaintiff's claim and rejected the government's so-called science. The Japanese government accepted court judgment on 29th July, but the next day, the Prime Minister issued a strange comment against the judgment. Quote, "The government cannot admit health effect of internal exposure regardless of the scientific dose estimation, because this is contradictory to the philosophy of the hibakusha aid regime," unquote. This could not disturb the court decision, but showed the government's predicament. The initial exposure and low dose effect not only contradicts its aid regime, but was also quite inconvenient for the whole national nuclear policy, including energy and deterrence. Both are also pillars of the NPT regime, which the Japanese government ratified in 1976 and has been deeply committed to since then. Moreover, recognition of low dose effects from internal exposure logically discredited Japan's authoritative hibakusha data, namely the lifespan study. It's more than 16 years of epistemological study targeting 120,000 subjects, including 94,000 hibakusha. This data has been utilized for setting radiation protection standards around the world. However, its research design itself ignored low-dose radiation and internal exposure, underestimating those risks. This court case made clear that this data cannot protect people from risk of low-dose radiation. The global impact of this judgment could be huge. Now the Japanese government has 2 choices of abandoning the precious hibakusha data or reorganizing it into a more reasonable one. Of course, I hope for the latter. We need a more scientific and rational radiation protection regime to ensure rights and dignity of nuclear survivors and also prevent more nuclear victims around the world. Thanks for listening.